Welcome to the Raise podcast. I'm Carol Barwick. We're here to raise your confidence and inspire your creativity. Each episode, we will have a different guest who will be discussing our Raise word. The Raise word is a word that will encourage you or empower you and at times inspire you to explore the word a little more for yourself. Well, hello everybody and welcome to the Raise podcast. I'm Carol Barwick. We've looked at lots and lots of interesting words. We've looked at the word hope recently, and today we're going to look at the word villain. Now, this is around Halloween. Historically, I don't do much around Halloween, but my interest was piqued by the word villain, and we've got a fantastic person who's going to speak to us today. He is definitely not a villain, but he has been in the world of heroes and villains, and that is Gareth Angel Thompson. Hi, Gareth, how are you doing?
Hi, Carol. I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
I'm really looking forward to this. So, Gareth, before we dive into the murky world of villains, what does the word villain mean to you?
So the word villain, I think, is an interesting word that to me brings up so many ideas and concepts. Yeah. I see villain as a storytelling device, as a anchor in the world to help us identify not just what villains are, but what heroes are too, because I think you have to have both villains and heroes as the same coin, just two different sides.
Yeah.
And so when I think of villains, I almost automatically think of heroes, but I know a good hero has a good villain. So I kind of, that's what comes to mind. And that's what the word means to me, is as a storyteller, I definitely need to have villains for the heroes to overcome. And as a professional wrestler, and what I've been doing over the past 10 years as both a hero and a villain at times, is understanding, well, what makes a villain? How does the world perceive villainous acts and what we do? And then how do you then flip the coin and overcome that as a hero? And how does that all work together? So the word villain actually quite excites me.
Yeah, excellent. I love the word flip. I think the word flip is a very physical word for you as a wrestler. Tell us a little bit, first of all, about the world of wrestling, because I have to admit that until I saw your program on BBC One recently, I didn't really know much about wrestling. So how does what you do kind of work with wrestling? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so wrestling is essentially soap opera for men. It's live action pantomime. It's stuntmen doing incredible feats of physical strength and athletic ability, but ultimately at its core, it's storytelling. Right. So professional wrestling is often, people say that it's fake. People say that it's garbage. Why do you watch that stuff? But I think it's more of an entertainment product than it is a physical sport, combat sport, like mixed martial arts or boxing. The idea behind wrestling is to create an emotive response from your audience and to give characters that people want to invest in emotionally, so that you can take them on an emotional roller coaster as you see that character play out their journey and go through their battles and their fights and overcome the obstacles in their way. Or on the flip of that, when you see villains come through who are people that you absolutely detest. And the end goal mainly is, most of the times, for people to pay money and buy tickets to come into a room and see said villain get battered by the hero. Or to see the hero continue to overcome and thrive, because in our world that we live in, we need an escape. We need to have something that we can put our hope in, someone that we can cheer on. The underdog story is a classic. And so wrestling provides all of that. And it's men and it's women and it's tag teams and there's drama and there's everything you would expect on EastEnders or Coronation Street kind of going on. There's love stories, there's all this stuff. And so the world of wrestling is very much about the characters. And I just love being a part of that and being able to, in a sense, manipulate a whole crowd of people into reacting exactly when I want them to react and exactly the way I want them to react. And so there's quite a lot of skill involved in that, psychologically as well as physically.
Really interesting. So when you say, ultimately people are paying to come and watch the villain get battered, does that mean that the villain will always lose, Gareth?
In the end, yes, the villain will always lose in the end.
Okay.
But for you to establish a villain, they have to do villainous things. So I can give you an ideal example of this that happened just this past Saturday for me. So I had become the world champion in our wrestling company. I'd overcome a villain that I'd been kind of toying with for over a year. And we introduced this new character, and he cheated to win his match. Now, there's ways in wrestling where the rules that we set up are complete illusions, but they don't exist. They're storytelling narratives to follow. So if a bad guy, you want to establish the bad guy, he will, push the referee, or he will use a weapon, or he will break the rules of whatever he's doing so well, he's the bad guy.
Right.
But I was already established as a good guy. We've got these fans that have been coming and joining in with our shows in Bradford for well over a year now. So they know Gareth Angel is the hero. He's the world champion. He's the man that we're following.
Yeah.
So this guy comes in and he cheats with a metal chair to win the match. So he hits me in the head with it, which is perfectly safe. I got my hand to it. It didn't actually hit me. So just to clarify that.
Yeah.
It's all stunt work. It's all tricks. And then we had it where he then picked me up for a move and like smashed me back first onto the chair, but actually the back of my head hit it. And this was very deliberate. So we wanted to create the illusion that I'd been knocked out, concussed, and was unable to kind of kick out of the move when he pinned me.
Yeah.
So the referee does the count. Now the crowd were in shock at this point because they didn't expect me to lose the belt within a month of winning it. Mm-hmm. They also didn't expect this guy who's come out of nowhere to be able to beat their hero who has overcome so much over the past year. And that was very deliberate as well, because I needed to have a new top villain to be able to take the spot. So that was the match. But what happened after the match was really where we pushed the envelope. So he then continued to attack me. So the referee had kind of thrown up Gaz is injured, threw up like an X with his hands to establish, Gaz is injured. And this is all story, obviously.
Yeah.
And then we had a few of our trainees who were kind of learning to wrestle. They came in and pretended to play like security or like medical staff. And so they're all like looking over me. And so Disciple, the bad guy, then turns around and starts pushing these guys out of the way, gets down and continues hitting me. And then eventually they managed to, scrape my limp body off the mat and carry me out of the venue. And as I'm being carried out, he attacks again. And beats me again. And each time the crowd reaction was getting more and more negative. Like the boos were getting louder. People were shouting and screaming. We had some guy get up off his seat to come over and try and intervene.
Oh,
so
goodness.
we riled the crowd up so much to the point that they physically want to get involved. Now, for me as a storyteller, I know full well that next month when we have our show, all he has to do is walk out and that crowd will negatively react to him in such a way that whoever comes out after him is going to get cheered, because they're going to hate him so much that whoever then steps in the ring alongside him, they're going to be cheering that person on.
So almost an automatic hero, just because the villain has been so bad, you've kind of produced an automatic hero with the next person that comes out.
Yeah. That's the psychological. That's the psychological thing that we're doing. So we're priming the audience to know this guy is the big bad guy now, and he's the one who's holding your title. He's gonna. So we need to establish him as a credible threat to whoever comes alongside him now, to eventually be toppled down the line by another hero who we will build up to take that from him. So you're always doing this in wrestling. You're always cycling through heroes and villains. But that's what we've done.
And can I say it was very realistic, because cute little gullible Carol saw that Gareth Thompson had been taken to hospital and immediately got on and said, "Are you okay?" And Gareth was like, "Yes, of course I'm okay. It's wrestling. It's pretend, Carol. I'm not really hurt." There I was thinking, watching my podcast episode go down the drain, thinking, Gareth's really hurt.
Yeah.
Oh,
you weren't the only one. We got
she
so
knows
many
so little about wrestling. Okay, so the first thing that we're kind of saying is the more villainous a villain is, the more heroic somebody that is wanting to do good can be, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it in regards to some of the ongoing issues in the world, these villains that produce themselves in different ways, and that can be in politics, that can be in war scenarios. It can be like, we always have this hero villain narrative that we seem to tell quite a lot, because it's a narrative that we as humans have followed throughout our history. The good versus evil story goes way back to the beginning of time. So we always have this hero villain narrative, and sometimes you need a good villain to create the best heroes. If you look across film and media, you could look at Neo in The Matrix and Mr. Anderson. Without Mr. Anderson to overcome, Neo is just a guy who could be the one. It's actually Neo who when he encounters Mr. Anderson, and Mr. Anderson essentially kills him, that he then becomes Neo. So he has to, the villain has to exist to spur the hero on. So that's what I absolutely love about it. And I've played villains. I've been villain in my wrestling time, and I know full well what my role is. My role is eventually to be beaten by a hero, and just to enjoy it while I can, and enjoy riling a crowd up and kind of get upsetting little children, and old grannies trying to hit me with handbags. Like that's all part of it. And like I do it in quite a silly way when I do it, because I have like, my faith is a big aspect of my personality and character. But whenever I play a villain, I don't want to be the worst, most heinous villain in the world who does some really horrible things.
You're a villain with standards.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's more the attitude. It's like cocky and mouthy, but I always lose. Whenever I play a villain, I say, hey, look, if you're going to book me as a bad guy, I need to lose, because the good should always overcome evil, and I believe that it does most of the time. It's just sometimes we have to endure times of evil to then see the good come through, but it always comes through in the end. It's
interesting though, isn't it? Because you are playing a villain, but your heart motivation is to be good. Whereas true villains definitely don't go out thinking, well, I'm really hoping that by doing all this bad stuff, the hero looks better than me. It's very much the opposite, isn't it? I mean, I've had an interesting talk with my my community, my race community group, about kind of what a villain's mission is. And it's been really interesting. And people were saying to kind of gain power over the other person, to distract the person from the hero, ultimately from their mission. It's an interesting role for a true villain to have, isn't it? Because do you think ultimately they go out thinking, well, it's 50-50 whether I'm actually going to win or not?
I think most villains believe that they're the heroes of their own story. I think that most villains believe that what they're doing is right, and what they're doing is for the betterment of them and their world, and whatever their motives are, them going out and doing these villainous acts will help them achieve their own goals, but they don't see themselves as the villain. I think they see themselves as the hero. If we, I don't really want to get too deep into politics, but if you look at the narrative that Putin is spewing from Russia, it's that he's liberating the Ukrainians, that he's the hero. We're the hero, we're going in to help them, but actually from the Ukrainians, like, no, you're coming here to destroy us, and actually we're the heroes. So he doesn't believe that he's doing anything wrong. He believes he's doing what's right. And so that's where we get into kind of the strength of the villain sometimes can be that what they're doing is actually in their mind completely like worth doing, and they will do whatever they need to do to get to doing it, because that's exactly what the hero does. The hero will do what they need to do and overcome what they need to overcome to defeat the villain. But it just depends on which side of the coin you land on as to what you're perceived to be, because that's another thing, is that some villains can be perceived as heroes by other people, and that can help spur them on, and vice versa. So take Thanos, for instance, in the Avengers films. What he believed he was doing was he was resetting the whole of the universe into balance, and to save planets that have been overpopulated, and by gathering the Infinity Stones and wiping out half of all life, he's doing everyone a favor, and he's doing it with no bias, with no judgment. It's going to be fair and equal, 50% straight down the line. But for the 50% that are going to die,
yeah,
then that's a villainous act.
yeah.
But potentially, if he had achieved, well, he did achieve what he wanted to do, and the whole time heist kind of reversed it back, which is the hero overcoming the villain in the end. The whole idea there was that, well, actually, for the 50% he saved, if you'd have given that a bit more time to play out, maybe they would have appreciated the fact that he did what he did, and he may have been perceived as a hero down the line. But you don't ever see that play out, because we're following it from the hero's perspective and the hero's narrative.
Yeah.
So it's always,
it's a bias. It's on the bias, isn't it? Marvel have made it one way so that we're looking at it from one way, and I think that's why I think films like Joker and recently the Cruella de Vil, they're starting to look at the backstories, aren't they? Maleficent, they're starting to look at the backstories, and we're wanting to know what makes a villain a villain. I'm just going to stop you for a minute, Gareth, because Emma Major, who has been a podcast guest in the recent podcast episodes, has written a poem. So I talked about being a villain about a week ago, and Emma and I both share this situation that we've got with long COVID and bad health, and she's got several other health problems as well. And we were talking about pain, and I was saying I really think it's bad, and she was saying how she feels that pain is a positive thing, and it led her to think about villains, and she wrote a poem. So just bear with me, I'm just going to read you this poem because it's very much what we've talked about so far. Who is a villain? It could easily be you. Let me explain the unexpected view. A villain was hurt, neglected, abused, never learned about love. Their childhood was blue. Don't get me wrong, not everyone who's hurt ends up a baddie, but villains got burnt. Their experience of life was to constantly pursue any sort of purpose, trying to find their value. Whether in gangs or alone and frustrated, villains found a home where they were accepted. Hope was the enemy throughout their youth. There in the darkness, they discovered their truth. No one could be trusted. Everyone has a grudge. Best to stay distant, not allow them to judge. These villains are lonely, unloved and in pain, desperate for acceptance. Just look again. Instead of your judgment, see into their hearts, examine possibilities or giving fresh starts. Forgive them their sins, offer them a chance to feel part of community, to slowly advance. The power of love is more than we know. A villain can change into tomorrow's hero. Deep, isn't it?
That's pretty much a nail on the head, exactly
yeah,
what it's been saying.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, for letting us share that poem. Absolutely amazing. But I've put it here and not at the end of the podcast because I think that we've still got an awful lot left to discuss. So we just shared Emma Major's amazing poem about who is a villain. And there's a verse here: a villain was hurt, neglected, abused, never learned about love, their childhood was blue. Gareth, in the BBC programme, you were very courageous to share a little bit of your background and the hurt that you suffered as a child and ending up sleeping in a skip. Is that right?
Yeah.
And yet the path that you have taken has been to really serve and honor and bring about potential in others. Why did you choose that path?
I think it's an interesting one to think of it through choosing a path. I think throughout most of my childhood, my path was not one that I had any real influence over. My childhood was extremely difficult, and my early years as an adult were also extremely difficult, because what had happened was all of the stuff that I'd gone through as a kid had created character traits in me that would have been, if left unchecked, potentially have taken me down some villainous paths. I think the attitude I carried with me was an effect of what had happened to me. The way I managed my relationships, the way that I operated, was very much a case of protecting myself and at any cost being able to be seen to be strong. Physical violence was a thing for me. I was very easy to get into a fight with, and my ego was very fragile yet very large at the same time, which was a complete mask. So I think, yeah, I didn't have a lot of choice over my path until it was changed and there was a fork in the road and suddenly a choice was presented. And I would say that was one of the first times I visited St. John's Church in Bradford. And in the middle of the worship, we're listening to all these songs about love, and I just found myself in tears. And I'd suddenly been confronted with a feeling that I hadn't felt before, and a feeling that I didn't know what to do with. And a gentleman came to me at the end of the service. I still don't know who he was. And he said to me, I said, I know why you were crying, and it's because you felt love for the first time and you didn't know what to do with it.
Wow.
And so that was a confrontation. That was a moment for me to have a choice what to do with that. And so I then made the choice to start looking at, okay, well, what does faith look like? What does hope and love look like? I didn't have any male role models, so I'm looking at these other men around me and going, okay, so what makes them good dads? What makes them good husbands? What makes them good friends? I'm looking at the marriages that I can see and say, well, what makes a good relationship? What's good parenting? Like what's good community look like? Good friendships, like real loyal, trustworthy friendships. And so I was being confronted every day by this. And that then led into further and further discussions when other bad stuff came along and I was rocked. My marriage fell apart, and I lost my job, and kind of thought I'd jumped to the winning side, but still had to confront some life stuff and found that hard. But then this amazing guy, Dave Kendall, who is an absolute rock of a man, and is someone who I still communicate regularly with, even 8-10 plus years later. He came around me and said, look, it's one thing to be challenged and confronted by stuff and to try and work through things. You've really got to dig into the depth of your past and really do some forgiveness, and to talk this stuff out with your mum, to talk this stuff out with your dad, to be able to forgive the people who've hurt you the most. And that brings about real true freedom. The biggest one of those being my abuser. So I was sexually abused as a child, between the ages of 7 and 8. And he went to prison for what he did. And at the point where me and Dave were working through this stuff, I hadn't seen him since then. So I'm early 20s, 23, 24 at this point. And so we would, I'd met with my mum and spoke with her. I'd found my dad and tried to restore a relationship with him, and was working on my, failing marriage at the time, and got myself back into work and had my debts dealt with and stuff. So kind of got everything done with, or just about, apart from my abuser. And so we prayed about it. And that was the only thing we could do, really, was to pray. And I prayed a very, very bold prayer, which again felt like I was putting the choice off me and giving it to God. I was kind of like, God, if you're real and you can help me deal with this, then I'm all in. And the next day I was at work, and my abuser walked into my place of work and joined the queue.
Oh, goodness.
So I'm then confronted again with a choice. He joined the queue and I had to serve him. I tried to avoid it. I couldn't do it. And so what happened there was, he handed over his DVDs and stuff, and I got the discs and cashed it through the till. And as I went to hand him his change back and held his hand, I was confronted with a choice, and it was a choice to deal with this and fix it and to forgive this guy, which was a massive ask, or to avoid it and let it continue to haunt me and continue to affect me as a man and continue to affect me as a husband and all the other stuff that it had affected in my life that I was now aware of. And so I looked him dead in the eyes and I said to him, I forgive you for what you did. And as I let go, I was like, okay, I'm all in.
Wow.
God, you've got me. Where do we go with this? And so that was then where I was like, okay, my story is not one for me to just mull over. My story is one that I believe should be shared. and is one that should be shared to encourage and inspire others to make changes in their own lives, to get themselves to a fork in the road, even if I have to present that fork in the road to them, to be able to make a choice to be a better person, or to make a choice to look at faith again, or to deal with the hurt and the bitterness and damage that their past has created for them to be able to forgive the villains in their life, whatever that villain is. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be a circumstance. It could be, it could be the setup that they're in. It could be the fact they're unemployed, or, it could even be the church. It could even be their past experiences with certain people and certain class or type of person. It can be their own prejudice. There's a whole bunch of different things that they can look at and fix. But that was for me, that was where the choice was made on my behalf.
Wow, what a choice. And I mean, so powerful when you said you held his hand, and then you had the choice to either kind of confront him or let him go. I mean, as someone who had been violent in the past, you could have had a further choice of, I'm sure some people would want to knock him out. I mean, amazing humility. And the word kind of transfer of power come to mind, that, in forgiving him, you were given the power back to now do all that you're doing. Initially, when we were going to talk about the word wrestle, because when I saw the BBC program, I was really taken by the way that you talked about using the physicality and anger that can come through when you're being that physical, to wrestle with things. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of de-villainize thoughts and feelings through the wrestling.
So when you look at some of the previous discussions we've had about wrestling earlier, about it being fake, that completely de-weaponizes it, because what we're doing is we're teaching people to be physical in a way that is safe and controlled. So when you're someone who has no self-control and no discipline and a lot of anger, to be violent at the absolute peak of using all of your strength is easy, because that's all you've ever known. Whereas in the wrestling world, it's the illusion of violence. It's to look as though you're going to punch someone in the face, but just before, your hand is open, like you're holding an egg, and it's not a closed fist, and you're slapping an area of your body to make a sound. You're not actually touching the person. So the amount of restraint and control and discipline that takes means that even in the simple art of throwing a punch, you are doing it to create minimal damage as much as possible, rather than maximum damage as much as possible. And what we do is we take that idea into, well, in your life, when you're confronted with a situation where you want to throw a punch, it doesn't have to be a physical punch. It could just be a reaction of any kind. Are you going to be doing it for maximum damage, or are you going to be doing it for minimum damage? And how do you do that? It takes discipline, it takes time, and it takes practice. Lots and lots and lots of practice. And so that's what we bring into the school, is when we do have outbursts from time to time of people who are stressed.
I'm sure,
they get a move wrong and they just and they smack the mat, or they, whatever. That's okay. That's fine. You're doing it in a space where you're not hurting anyone. But hey, let's next time that happens, let's just temper it. And practice and practice and practice. And giving people tools, like being able to teach someone how to throw a punch without punching is a skill. And it's a tool then that you then have. And so, I often look at people's lives and think, well, why are you in such a mess? Do you just not have the right tools in your toolkit? Is that budgeting? Is that being able to write a good CV? Is that strong male role models? Is that, decent relationships in your life? Is that there's a whole bunch of different things that you can look at, because I'm often walking alongside people who've been through similar things like me, and they're saying, well, yeah, my dad was never around, and so I haven't learned how to be a good father to my kids. I haven't learned how to parent well. or they're just replicating the behaviors that they've seen in other people or their own parents. And so they have to unravel that and unpick it, and they just don't have the tools in their toolbox.
Yeah.
So how do we help them gain those tools to help them deal with whatever it is that they're coming to us with?
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm hearing a lot of, quite rightly, that sympathy and empathy. One of my questions that's kind of going through my head is, I wonder how much a villain is someone who just doesn't take responsibility. So what you're talking about is giving people these tools, so helping them to be responsible. And something that I learned quite a while ago is the word responsibility is literally the ability to respond, and you are giving them the ability to respond. I was going to say correctly, that's a horrendous word for this particular, not correctly, well and practically, and in the best way possible. We were talking earlier on about maximum, wanting to do the maximum, and in this case, goodness, a maximum good with what you've got and those tools. But I wonder, particularly with fictional villains, how much it is just I haven't got the time, or I can't be bothered to ask for help, so I'm just gonna rob a bank because it's just quicker. It's just a quicker way to make money, or I'm just going to murder this person because then I don't have to deal with them anymore. Any thoughts on that?
I think patience is something that we lack as a society these days. Everything is just so quick. The news cycle, social media, we want results and we want them now. And so, when you're like, I want to get rich, so I'm just going to rob a bank. Without patience, of course, that's what you're going to do. Without a plan, without goal setting, without thinking through the steps and thinking through the consequences of those steps, you are going to rush and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to do things in a way that hasn't been thought through and will cause more problems. I spent a long time working with people who are unemployed, as part of my job with CAP and with Reed, as well as an organisation.
So CAP's Christians Against Poverty.
Christians Against Poverty, So a lot of that came down to setting good goals. And those goals had to be achievable. They had to be realistic, and they had to have a deadline. You couldn't just be setting goals and just be like, well, I'll never achieve. I'll achieve that in 8 weeks. Oh, actually, let's try and get it done. What I found was barely anyone ever set goals in their lives, and that's because they were so impatient. They just wanted the result. They didn't want to go through the steps of the process to get the result. And so that made people give up, because they just thought, I'm trying to do this as quick as I can. It's not working, so I'm just going to give up. And so they were like, well, what's even the point in setting a goal? Because no one's going to ever employ me because I'm 60, or no one's ever going to employ me. And then it became excuse after excuse after excuse, or the fact that they've been rejected so many times just made them completely lose hope and belief in themselves that they could achieve what they want to achieve. So I think in a society, what we need to be doing is, and I say maybe what we could be doing better is maybe a better way of phrasing it, is we could be helping people see the potential in themselves and then helping them plan towards making that a reality. And that is something that I think is just something we're just not taught. It's just something that just doesn't come through in school, doesn't come through in community centers. It's just not happening unless you're in a group where that's a key pivotal part of what you're doing. And you can use goals to achieve anything. You can use goals to change your mindset. You can use goals to create habits. You can use goals to reach fitness goals, to get yourself in shape. You can do it to build a business. Like that, you can use goals in almost every area of your life. And good goal setting is a key integral part of anyone who's successful. I believe most that I've spoken to have had goal setting as a key part of their day-to-day habits. And it's easy to do now. We've got mobile phones that you can put reminders and to-do lists and all this other stuff into. And again, it's just another tool in the toolbox. It's like, are we using technology to the best, or are we just sat scrolling through Facebook because we're numb to the world and we've given up? I just think that goal setting is a key integral part of that.
But you were saying about them giving up before they've even begun, or just not having enough hope in themselves or self-belief. So I wonder if a kind of a villain is someone that is in effect hopeless, and is they then tend to control, I think, because they think, right, well, if I can't make this happen through self-belief, I'm just going to control as much as I can. I've always thought that control is is such an important thing to get right. When you have self-control, like you were talking about through the wrestling, it's really pivotal, isn't it? Whereas if you lose control, that's when all the difficult things start to happen in abundance, and it kind of snowballs, doesn't it? I mean, you often see that, again, kind of referencing the Avengers films and things like that. The villain does one thing, and then they have to do another thing to cover it up, and then they have to do another thing to make sure no one finds out, and it kind of snowballs. Just thinking about, saying about patience and things like that not being taught. I think one of the problems with schools is that there are goals, but that they're higher up. And so instead of the children reaching their goals, it becomes more of a tick box exercises for those higher up. And I think that's one of the, not wanting to get into a big educational discussion, but I think that can be one of the problems, is that that patience isn't reflected, because it's all about, we must tick these boxes now so that we can get the money, so that we can keep the school going. And they forget that ultimately there are all these individual children that are ticking the boxes for them, but actually not learning the things they really need to learn, like patience and encouragement and empathy, and those things that really make the world go round and produce true heroes, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think as well, what it does is it brings them into their first kind of experience of authority.
Yeah.
And the authority within the school is telling them, well, you're not good enough, and you're not doing enough, and you're not this and you're not that. So you aren't going to achieve because of X, Y, Z. And they go out into the world, and then the job coach sat across them in the job center says, well, you need to do this. If you haven't done that, then you need to do this.
Yeah.
And the police officer comes along and says, well, you need to be doing this, and you're doing that.
Yeah.
And so they then go, well, why should I respect authority when I don't ever have a positive experience when I come into contact with it? And then it just becomes, you just see this rebellious attitude of, well, if I'm going to take drugs, I'll take drugs. If I'm going to, have fireworks going off at 2 a.m., I've got no respect for anyone else. What's authority going to do? Tell me to turn them off? Well, I'll just do it anyway. And I'm using some pretty lame examples there, but that's what you see. You see this lack of respect for authority.
It starts somewhere, doesn't it? Those little acts of rebellion and carelessness, and people don't realize how much they grow into an attitude of, well, if I'm happy to set fireworks off at 2 o'clock in the morning, if there's some kids around about me and I want to set a firework off, I'll do that too. And if it hits them, and I'll leg it, and it snowballs, doesn't it? It's like it, and so it's catching it while it's kind of early. But the difficult thing, I think, is knowing how, we were talking about things playing out, how different things are going to play out in people, because particularly with children, you don't know how they're going to react. And as they grow up, you start seeing, you're a rebel, right? Let's not nip it in the bud, far from it. Let's bring out all that potential of, well, I'm going to do it anyway, and let's use it as a literal force for good. And it's seeing that potential, isn't it? And I know, just going back to education, teachers that are just heartbroken because they see the potential in the children, but they just haven't been given the time to bring it out, because it's tick boxing, that word, tick
box ticking exercise. Yeah.
Thanks, Gareth.
Yeah. I think as well, like when we talk about this theme of villains, that's when you then end up with these people being the hero of their own story, and the villain being the authority. The villain is my job center coach. It is the politicians. It is whatever else is kind of happening in my world. I'm the hero because the policeman becomes the villain, when we all know actually the police are there to uphold good standing and everybody doing the right thing, and to actually catch the real villains out there in the world. But this whole lack of respect of authority, and this lack of patience, and just wanting to do what you want to do when you want to do it, just creates all these other issues. and then the heroes become the villains, and these future villains see themselves as the heroes of their own story. And that's when we get into some really dangerous territory, when we bring in control. And what they can control is, well, I can control others, I can control younger people, I can control, you know, my partner, I can control my children, I can control all these other things that I have influence over. And that's when we end up with really broken families, broken people, and really messy situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I think we could talk about this for ages. There's so much to kind of bring out of it, isn't it? But I think we need to kind of bring it to a close. Is there anything else that you're wanting to say on this subject, or anything about, you know, what you do? We've touched on what you do with the wrestling, but anything else that you want to share with us before we finish?
I would just say, the one thing that I've always found to be really encouraging is when we see, I know we're talking about young people here actually, and you mentioned it briefly with the teachers being heartbroken for these young people. I've got a real heart for seeing people reach their full potential and the goodness that they have in them. And I think we should never, ever write anybody off and think that they're too old to change, or too far gone to change, or too young to understand. I think what we need to do is, if we know that there is a young man or a young woman, or an old man or an old woman who is so broken and almost looks as though they're beyond disrepair, never give up hope on them, and actually come alongside them. And you will be so surprised by how you can turn people's lives around by just being a good person in their life, and giving them something to look to. I find my Facebook often, I'm getting random messages from people who have just seen what we're doing, or just kind of heard my story somewhere, or they've kind of come across me in some form, and they say just how encouraging and inspiring my story is. And they could be the other side of the country, and I'm like, well, how do I connect you in with some good people where you are? Because if you've heard this and you're wanting to change, I want to help you change. And I've had 65-year-old men come to me in that situation who have been harboring things all of their life from their childhood. And I've had young kids, 15, 16, who have come to me and spoke to me about things, and just been blown away about how, you know, the young people feel like they can't talk about it. And then also 65-year-old man feels like he couldn't talk about it. And I just want to be saying to everyone out there, if you're in that position, reach out to someone. And if you know someone, reach out to them, and just be there for them. Because I really believe that by talking through what we're going through, and identifying our villains, and identifying our own way of overcoming those obstacles and stuff, we can really turn people's lives around.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, that's brilliant. So people listening, that's your challenge, as you listen to this. Who do you need to get alongside and encourage, even if you see that they've got a difficult side to them, or a rebellious side, or something's not right? How can you help them, and help them to kind of flip this side of the coin, so that they have their full potential? Gareth, you said it a lot better than me. Okay. We come to the part of the podcast where I write a little poem. I do it on the spot. So I'm just going to have a couple of seconds to just get my thoughts together. An unforgiven hero, or a heart of solid black. Someone with no hope, who is always looking back. Someone with potential, who has followed the wrong path. Someone who is hurting and now sees the aftermath. Do we have responsibility to see the heart within? Can we make a difference to those people and begin to bring the hero out, the one that others see? Maybe there's a villain in me. That's it. That was a surprising end, but I actually think I'm going to keep it because it's an important question.
I believe so. Yeah.
That was a surprise. But yeah. Okay, right. Well, challenge to Carol too. Important. Gareth, thank you so much. Thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability. We'll put all about the BBC programme that you did in the show notes, and about the wrestling church and all the good that you're doing. And yeah, keep wrestling and keep doing all that good. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.